We were literally on a boat in the middle of the Nile River going to this temple before the sun came up, and we got to meditate as a group together. We got to have a very intense spiritual experience, having this quiet time together there, being able to meditate together as a group, being able to be there as the sun rose, and we got to watch the sunrise over the Nile River in Egypt. Was pretty magical. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Energetically Efficient Show. I am really excited about today's episode because I'm finally giving you guys a recap of my Egypt retreat. Now, for those of you who have not been following along, I went on a spiritual retreat to the country of Egypt for 2 full weeks. I was there from the late part of October to the beginning part of November, and it was quite the experience. There were so many different things that I learned on so many different levels, and I'm excited to give you a recap episode all about it in case spiritual work is interesting to you, in case you want to learn about what we were doing on the retreat, or in case you're just curious about what an experience like that might be about. So what I decided to do, because there's so much to share, is I decided that I would break up this particular topic, meaning an Egypt recap, into 2 different episodes. So today's episode is going to be a lot about what we did and all of the good that I experienced, all of the positives about this retreat. And I felt like that would be a really good way to start the episode, or to start the recap, because of course we'd like to hear about the good rather than the bad. And then I'd like to record a separate episode for you, which I will do after I record this, that's actually all about the difficult things about this experience. There were very interesting stories that I'll get into in that episode that happened to me, that came up for me specifically, and then just things that were happening as a result of our group when you get a powerful group of individuals like that to do this kind of deep spiritual work together. So let's get into all of the good stuff. And I want to start by telling you about where we went. So the experience of even getting there was very interesting because I decided to fly out of Minneapolis specifically rather than Nashville, because I really wanted to take a Delta flight since I have status on Delta, and I wanted to be able to fly Delta. I find that airline to be the best. It's my favorite. I travel a lot. And so I've tried to get a few different flights going from Nashville to Minneapolis, and then Minneapolis getting me to Cairo through other cities, and the options just weren't as good. So I decided to drive to Minneapolis with the 3 golden retrievers, with Ketch, Belle, and Maeve, so that I could drop them off at my friend's home. This amazing family who takes care of the girls while I travel. The names are Megan and Max Wessel, and they have 2 kids, Mason and Maddie, and they are amazing, and I love these humans so much. But they took really good care of my girls while I was in Egypt. So it was really fun to be able to get photos of them and videos of them while I travel, and it made the experience for me so much better. Being gone that long is to know that they were so well cared for. But I'm sharing that part of the story with you because my trip started when I made that drive to Minnesota. So I went back into my phone because I was trying to figure out when I was actually making that drive. Since this retreat started in Egypt on October 28th, that was a Tuesday. I had to leave, not on October 28th. I had to leave much earlier than that from Minnesota. So I left that prior weekend. So I really was driving to Minneapolis, to Minnesota, from mostly on October 24th, which was a Friday. But in order to get some of the hours under my belt so that I didn't have to do it all in one day, because it's like a 12-hour drive, but with stopping and getting gas and letting the dogs out, it always takes me about 14 hours. So I left the evening of the 23rd. So I left to drive to Minnesota from Nashville on the evening of the 23rd, and I was not fully in Egypt ready to be settled until the 27th, 28th. So I share that with you just because this was a very long journey for me. So I left on the 23rd, got to Minneapolis the evening of the 24th, and then I flew out on the 25th, the afternoon of the 25th, from Minnesota. So I flew from Minneapolis to Paris. And incidentally, a friend of mine who I knew from the Twin Cities, had reached out to me several months ago and told me that she was also going to be on the spiritual retreat. I had introduced her to the work of the group that was hosting this retreat, and the name of that group is Spherical Luminosity. The primary woman who leads these retreats is a woman named Karen Chong. She's a very high vibrational human. She's become a very good friend of mine. I respect her tremendously, and I had introduced this friend of mine, Erin, to Karen's work several years ago, and she said, I just felt called to be on this experience in Egypt. And so because she's in the Twin Cities, she ended up booking the same flight that I did. So we traveled to Cairo together. But the fun part of that was we actually had an 11-hour layover in Paris. And thank goodness for Erin, she planned a bunch of things for us. She had a driver come to pick us up. We had got to see a bunch of the sights in Paris, and then we got back to the airport and flew to Cairo, which was really fun. So I had a whole day in Paris before we got to Cairo. And once we got to Cairo, Aaron decided to stay in Cairo for a night, whereas I decided to immediately get on a flight to Aswan, Egypt, Aswan, where our retreat was starting about a day later. So I got to Aswan, Egypt sometime in the morning or afternoon of October 27th, and I had a lot of time then to recuperate, to rest before our retreat started the next day on October 28th. So that was sort of the logistics of the travel of getting there. But then I want to get into the meat of the retreat and what we did and where we traveled. So if you look at a map, if you get out Google Maps, if you go into your phone and look at a map, you'll see that Aswan, Egypt is fairly south of Cairo. So I flew from Minneapolis to Paris, Paris to Cairo, and then I took another airline. I took 3 different airlines while I was in Egypt. So I was on Nile Air, I was on Egypt Air, and I was on Cairo Air for different flights on that trip. So my flight originally from Cairo to Aswan got me into Aswan, and then I went to stay at the hotel where the retreat was starting. Now, when we got into Aswan, we were told that we had to be sort of in our hotel. You weren't really allowed to walk around by yourself because Egypt, and I'll get into this in a separate podcast episode like I told you about when I'll talk about some of the negative parts of this experience, but it really wasn't super safe to be walking around by ourselves. So I sort of just rested. I got some work done, and the retreat didn't start until the next day. And so then once the retreat started, it was on the 28th of October, and we did a group meditation. We gathered together, and our first journey of the retreat really started by an experience where we went to a temple called Philae Temple. Philae. And I wrote that because the interesting thing was we started that in the night. It was very, very early morning. And we went on a boat over the waters. It's really what Philae Temple is it's in Aswan, but it's really on an island in the Nile River. So we were literally on a boat in the middle of the Nile River going to this temple. Before the sun came up, we got to have a private experience there before other guests came, and which was really, really magical. And we got to meditate as a group together. We got to have a very intense spiritual experience. I'll talk a little bit more about some of those as I go through with this episode, but just suffice it to say that our experience in the temple, having this quiet time together there, being able to meditate together as a group, being able to be there as the sun rose, and we got to watch the sunrise over the Nile River in Egypt was pretty magical. It was wild. And so we were doing that all of October 29th. And then we came back and stayed at our hotel in Aswan. We had dinner ready for us. We got to do some Q&A. We got to talk about our experience. And then the next day on the 30th of October, we took a trip and went to Elephantine Island. So Elephantine Island is another island. And I did look this up before this because I wanted to make sure that I was specific with you guys in terms of where we were. So Elephantine Island, I think it was also in the Nile. Was that part of the Nile? Yes. Which is very interesting because so much of our journey was over the Nile. So Philae Temple was on an island in the Nile River, and then Elephantine Island was in a separate island. And so we went there and again had some meditations, had some group experiences. Certain things were happening at each of these islands. And interestingly, there isn't really permission to meditate in a lot of these spaces. So we had to either do these really sort of undercover or just do some more silent meditations or things on our own in order to make them happen in these different portals. We went to a different temple the next day, which is the Temple of Kom Ombo. That was back in the US, it was Halloween. So that was on the 31st of October. And we did that in the morning. And when we had that experience, I didn't really feel anything in particularly powerful, at least when we were at that particular temple. But certain of the temples we went to, I had even more experiences. So what's interesting about this work, and I should probably back up and tell you what we were doing. So when I say spiritual retreat, what I mean is a meditation retreat. What I mean is a retreat where we're doing deep frequency work, working to elevate our individual frequencies and the frequency of the collective consciousness, the frequency of the planet, to get us to a high vibrational place so that we can truly experience the joy, the abundance, all of the blessings that we are supposed to have here as human, our life gets better and better and better the higher our frequency resonance gets. And if you're interested in learning more about frequency work or frequency resonance, I very much recommend that you check out my mentor who hosted this spiritual retreat. Her name, like I said earlier, is Karen Chong. Her website is sphericalluminosity.com, and we'll put a link below to her website just so that you can learn more about it if you're interested. But one of the things that I've learned from her over the years and other spiritual mentors that I've had is just the way that we render as human is dictated in large part, frankly, solely by the level of our vibration, the level of our frequency resonance. And by just way of, a simple explanation, I want you guys to think about or remember that everything in the world is vibrating. Everything is a rate of vibration. So I'm vibrating at a certain frequency rate. This simple water bottle that's just sitting here has its own vibration. My phone has its own vibration. You have your own vibration. The tree outside of my window has its own vibration. Every single thing alive or not alive has a vibrational rate. And the higher your vibrational rate, frankly, the better your life is. The higher your frequency resonance, the better that you can call in circumstances into your life, have different, from the time that you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night, the higher your rate of vibration, the more magical, beautiful, and powerful your life is going to become. So I've been doing and practicing frequency work since 2019. I would tell you that it is truly, for me, the way that I have created the most deep and intense connection with God, or what I refer to as God. Some people would say source, some people would say the creator, some people would say higher power. It doesn't matter what you call it. Raising your own vibration is truly, truly the way to have the most magical and abundant life that you want to enjoy. And so I'd say that by way of just a little sidebar, simply because if you're curious about what I mean when we're doing these meditations, it's all working to raise our frequency resonance. So speaking of frequency resonance, the next thing we did in the afternoon of the 31st is we went to the Temple of Edfu, EDFU. And what we were doing in this journey, starting at the Philae Temple, going to Elephantine Island, going to the Temple of Kom Ombo, going to Edfu, is if you look at a map and you can see how we were traveling from Aswan up to the city of Luxor in Egypt. So we hadn't really hit Luxor yet. I think Luxor is close to Edfu. We went to the Valley of the Kings the next day. I'll get into that a little bit. But I want to pause to talk about Edfu because for me, when we visited Edfu, that was truly one of the most powerful experiences throughout this entire spiritual retreat. And I could feel it. I could feel the power of the land from the moment we stepped off the bus when we got to this temple. And I would have told you guys before this experience in Egypt, I would have told you, okay, I can sort of sense energy. I'm very intuitive. I would say that I have a decent amount of experience in terms of being aware of and experiencing energy. But something happened to me when I got off that bus where it became like, wow, I could not ignore it anymore. When I got off that bus, it was like, I could just sense how highly vibrating the land was. And a year ago, when I had a 2-week spiritual retreat in Scotland, also with spherical luminosity, I had some moments during that retreat where I could just sense how high vibrational the land was, especially when we were in the Highlands of Scotland. It was pretty remarkable. So what I mean by the experience that I had in Edfu, much like the experience that I had in Scotland, is you can feel the resonance of the land. It almost feels, and this is just my personal experience, other people may have had a different one, but it almost feels a little bit like when you're on the land, you feel a little floaty, almost like you're levitating. I know that kind of sounds crazy, but to me, it's just when I experience being in a higher vibrational state in my humanness, that's one of the ways I experience it, is I experience almost like I feel like I'm levitating a bit. And that's when I know that my frequency resonance is higher. That's when I know that I'm in a higher vibrational state because I almost feel like I'm in a state of levitation. So then we went into different rooms in this temple and they were extremely powerful. So I want to take you through what happened to me during one of these meditations because I wouldn't have believed it if it didn't happen to me. So we're in this room, in this particular temple, and we only had a few minutes in there. So our group leader was taking us through this meditation where we were doing things like focusing on our heart space, focusing on our solar plexus, maybe thinking about our, different third eye, different ways that we could connect to source and opening up our connection to source. And as we were doing that, and as we were in this meditation, you guys, I'm going to show you this on video since we're on video. I was having a full like actual experience like this. I was shaking, my body was shaking because of this deep connection to source and how much energy was moving through my body and how much my team of light on the other side was pushing this energy through my body. At least that's how I experienced it. Other people had different experiences. Some may have been as powerful, if not more. Others may have not been. But for me, when I was in this room in the Temple of Edfu, I was truly doing this. And it was not intentional. This was very involuntary. And so what I did in that experience, because I was trying to just accelerate and receive all of this energy through my body, is I said to my guides in my head, and when I say guides, I mean my team on the other side, my connection to source, my connection to God. I said to God, I actually need you to slow down. This is too much. There's too much energy coming in for me. And I just need you to slow down a little bit. And so just as I said that, all of a sudden it stopped. My body stopped moving. And it was like I could integrate that work. I could feel that energy coursing through my body. Because again, you guys, newsflash, you are 99.99% energy. You are less than 0.01% of physical body. This is a very, very small part of who you actually are. So I was feeling all of this vibration in my energetic body. And so I said to my guides, you have to slow down. This is too much for me. And then as I sort of rested into that stillness and we were still meditating and I was still listening to Karen and I was still focusing on the parts of my body and my energy that she mentioned, I then said to my guides inside my head, just to them, okay, you can go again. I can take it. And instantly after I said that, my body started doing all of the shaking again and the energy started moving through me. It was quite powerful. I knew something was happening. I didn't know what that was. I couldn't tell you specifically what that was. I couldn't tell you which of my guides were doing what or what that means for me in terms of my frequency resonance. But to me, you guys, that doesn't matter. And one of the things that I come back to all the time with this work is that our humanness, our minds want to make meaning so much of all of these things and try to put some sort of labels on them or try to say what it means, or it means that, I have these gifts or these gifts are going to come in for me, or we just want to make such significance of it. All I can tell you that it was an experience that for me felt very powerful. It felt good in my physical body. It felt not even scary, but it just felt like surprising. I would say it felt, I felt curious about it. I was curious about it. And it felt like it opened me up to another level of frequency resonance and a higher vibration than I had experienced before. So that was interesting. And it was, we closed out that meditation, the shaking, the vibration of my body stopped. And then we moved into a different room. And as we moved into this next room, I also felt a tremendous amount of power in that room. And as we started the meditation, not only did that shaking start for me again, but in this particular room in the Edfu Temple, I started to sob. And I didn't associate meaning with it. I couldn't tell you what I was crying about. It's not like I was feeling an emotion per se of sadness. At least I couldn't identify an emotion attached to a particular event. I just knew that I was crying and releasing and crying and releasing. And all of that energy was moving through my physical body and it was coming out in the vibrations of the movements like I had in the first temple. But now on top of it, I was crying and I was crying pretty hard. And one of the women in our group, who's one of the group leaders, came over to me, and she's just a light, bright, beautiful woman who I've become very good friends with. Her name is Fiona. And she grabbed my hand at that part because she could see what was going on with me. And as she grabbed my hand, it did help to ground me a little bit into the experience that we were having. And my crying lessened a little bit. So I was able to just feel her support that I was receiving. And so the vibration slowed a little bit, that I was having the shaking and the crying stopped a little bit. And eventually a few minutes later, that all was over and we moved into a different room. So what was I experiencing that? I can't tell you. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. What I can tell you is, since this entire spiritual retreat in Egypt, I feel very grounded. I feel very bright. I feel a lot more easeful. I feel softer. I feel grateful for the experience. And I know that my frequency resonance is higher. I know that my vibration of my energy has changed, which means that life flows easier and that opportunities present themselves and abound. So I can't tie that specific experience to something exactly that has shown up in my life. But what I can tell you is I just feel really good. I feel really bright. I feel really excited. I feel truly like something shifted for me in a way that I can't explain since my Egypt retreat. And I'll get into some of the downsides of that in this other episode that I told you, where I told you I'd go over the good. And then in a separate episode, of course, I'll go over the bad. And I really don't like to label things, you guys, good or bad. I like to say that things just are. It's the labels that we put on them as humans that make them good or bad. But I guess what I would just tell you is I'm calling it that for ease of simplicity. Here's all of the good, and then I'll talk about some of the bad, or just the more difficult things about going on an experience like this. Okay, so that was Edfu, and again, that was on Halloween. I should also mention about that particular temple that the amount of blue and gold light that we saw, in fact, underneath this, I don't know if I can do that. Can I share? Oh, I know what I can do. I will put a photo right here for you so that you can see a photo of what I'm talking about with the blue and gold light that we were working with. And we were working with blue and gold light in terms of frequencies. You can't deny it when you look at these photos. These are unedited photos. These are not filtered in any way. You can see how much blue and gold light we were working with, as you can see in these photos here. So that was quite beautiful. Then the next day, which happened to be November 1st, which actually, if you don't know of, is the Day of the Dead. And I think that's primarily a tradition in Mexico. I believe it's only in Mexico. But at the Day of the Dead, you can't make it up. We didn't plan this. We went to the Valley of the Kings. And the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, which got us closer to Luxor. I think we were almost near Luxor at that time. I think that actually is in Luxor, because we were moving our way throughout, going to all these temples from Aswan up to Luxor. When we got to Luxor and went to Valley of the Kings, we did that on the Day of the Dead. November 1st is the Day of the Dead. And Valley of the Kings happens to be like the largest, most expansive cemetery, I believe, perhaps in all of Egypt. So very interesting that that's where we were. It's also where King Tut is buried. So I got to see the tomb of King Tut, and that was pretty interesting to be able to see that history. It was oppressively hot on the day that we were at the Valley of the Kings. So that was one of the only days of the trip that I felt comfortable, especially because Valley of the Kings was such a tourist attraction that I wore shorts. I had short sleeves. There's a lot in the Muslim tradition about women needing to be covered. So I was really trying to be respectful throughout the course of the trip and be covered more than I might in my normal life in America. And so at the Valley of the Kings, I actually was able to wear shorts and not have my head covered. And I felt really good about that because it was well over 100 degrees. It felt like probably 120, and the sun was scorching hot. So it was really, really hot that day. So the Valley of the Kings was interesting. And then the next day, also still in Luxor, the next day was November 2nd, and we went to a temple of Dendera, and that is the temple that's associated with the Hathors collective. And so the Hathors are a group of beings that were supporting us a fair amount on this trip because they, like other groups of beings that we were working with on this trip and the support that we had, the beings that are known as the Hathors are really hoping that humans can rise in consciousness and can truly continue to awaken so that we can thrive and truly have the human race live a lot longer than the average 80, 90 years old that we do. I mean, a lot of these beings are working to support us so that as humans, we can awaken during this lifetime and truly understand our power and understand that we are all connected and that we are all one, that we all emanate from the same source, and that we are simply just individuated consciousness that chooses to lower itself in vibration enough to become human form and have this density of a human. So we were working with the Hathors. We got to spend time with them at the Dendera Temple. And just like when we were at Edfu, the Dendera Temple also had tons of blue, which was beautiful, and gold. There were really, really high statues that were around us at all times, and we got to meditate in certain special portals. I didn't have anything happen at Dendera that was as powerful as what happened for me at Edfu, but still very, very intense energy, powerful meditations, and just a beautiful, beautiful historic site to see in Egypt. Then after we left the Hathors, we're still in Luxor, and on the 3rd of November, we went to the temple of Karnak. And Karnak Temple was another powerful temple. Again, I didn't have any major experiences there, but just looking at Karnak Temple in terms of where it is relative to everything else that we did, this was still in Luxor, but now we were heading a little bit north of Luxor by the 3rd of November. And so that was so that we could get closer and go to eventually the Great Pyramids, which is what we did on November 4th. So mostly of the time when people think of Egypt, that's what they think about. They think about the quote unquote Great Pyramids. And this is really in the Giza Pyramid Complex. And that is the city, or I think it's city of Giza, which is Giza, separate, very separate and different from the Israeli country and the area that's known as Gaza, which is Gaza. This is actually just Giza, which is Giza. And that's a Giza Pyramids complex. And that's where people think of the quote unquote Great Pyramids. That is in Giza. So just backing up to Karnak for a really short, brief moment, that was on the 3rd of November. I didn't really feel a tremendous amount of energy anywhere, but that one was there were a lot of people there. So, and it was, I remember that was the one where I saw some date trees that I took some photos of, and we got to meditate in a particular building where we had a lot of support from the Hathors. So we were in this sort of unique space that was off on its own. We got to do a meditation there and just had another awesome day of being in community. Okay, and so after Dendera, like I mentioned, we went to the Great Pyramids. That was on the 4th of November. And in that, the most magical thing that we did there, and this was all optional for the group of our retreat, I think there were 40 or 45 of us. There were between 40 and 50 people on this experience. And so what Karen had told us prior, hi, Belle. Belle's chewing on her cow. It's getting close to dinner time, so they're getting hungry. What Karen had told us prior to going to the Great Pyramids is, it is optional if we want to go up inside the King's Chamber. And the King's Chamber is within one of the Great Pyramids, and it's very, very difficult to get up there because you have to climb. And I'll share about this again in another podcast episode, but you have to climb in a very narrow tunnel. So if you're claustrophobic, very scary. And you get all the way up to this very small room where a lot of people don't think much of it. So it was very interesting when we were going up into the King's Chamber, because I, of course, was one of the people that decided I wanted to go. And I felt a very powerful experience once I was in the King's Temple. We didn't have a lot of time when we were in there, but I was able to meditate on my own in terms of just being in this particular space for a bit and feel activation within my energy body of ancient lineage experiences that I had had. I mean, I can't identify for you something specific, but I can just tell you that I felt a tremendous amount of power and as though energy was moving through me from many lifetimes ago. So that was pretty incredible. So the King's Temple, we went to sort of midday there when we got to the Great Pyramids. And then that afternoon, evening, we finally left Luxor and we flew back to Cairo. So remember, I had started my Egypt journey in Cairo, flew to Aswan where the retreat actually started. And then we moved from Aswan up to Luxor, went to a number of different temples, and eventually from Luxor flew to Cairo. And the reason that we flew to Cairo is because from Cairo, where we only stayed overnight one night, we had to get back on a flight the next morning out of Cairo. And we flew to a place in Egypt that I had never heard of before called Sharm el-Sheikh. And Sharm el-Sheikh, if you take out a map, I thought this was really interesting. Here's what I'll analogize it to for everyone who's listening to this in either America or Mexico, or at least knows North America very well. Perhaps you're in Canada and you know North America. I always think of, remember in Mexico, how if you go to somewhere like Cancun, there's that whole separate area in Mexico called the Yucatan Peninsula where there's Tulum. Egypt has that same thing. And that's where Sharm el-Sheikh is. And so what I learned while I was on this trip is that Sharm el-Sheikh, because it's it's a city at the end of this point on an offshoot of Egypt, and it's on the Red Sea, it's a big destination place. It's a city of destination for people who have a lot of money, people who come from Russia, people who travel from all over in the Middle East. They have this as a destination place. And so Sharm el-Sheikh is a very interesting city to visit. Now, we only stayed in Sharm el-Sheikh for a very brief period of time once we flew there from Cairo, because we had to get on a bus and drive all the way to St. Catherine, because several of us decided that we were going to hike Mount Sinai, which is in St. Catherine. So we hiked up Mount Sinai that next morning, which happened on the morning of November 6th. I had to sort of make a note of this. So we did the Great Pyramids on the 4th of November. We flew to Cairo that evening and then made our way from Sharm el-Sheikh to St. Catherine, all on, I believe, November 5th. So maybe we flew from Cairo to Sharm el-Sheikh on November 5th and then drove to St. Catherine, because that's what we did. Because then we had to get up early in the morning in St. Catherine to go and hike Mount Sinai. Now, this was one of the highlights of the trip for me. I thought hiking Mount Sinai, getting up at 2 a.m, doing this in the dark, watching the sunrise. We happened to do it on one of the most amazing full moons that we have seen this year in 2025. And so it was incredible as we watched the sunrise. on Mount Sinai because we hiked up before the sunrise. We got to watch the sunrise, and I was literally watching the sunrise on one side of the mountain, and I would turn around and I could see the full moon still brightening the sky on the other side. It was quite magical. That's kind of one of those things that you do once in a lifetime. So we came back to St. Catherine after we hiked down Mount Sinai. We got to have some group experiences in St. Catherine. We got to visit the St. Catherine Monastery. I got to see the burning bush. That is the classic story in the Bible. For those of you who know of the story of Moses and the burning bush, I also got to see the well, which was pretty remarkable. So that was really neat to see all of the ancient history. But truly for me, being in St. Catherine and having some powerful meditations there, one of the highlights was this hike up Mount Sinai. Then, once we left St. Catherine, we actually went back to Sharm el-Sheikh because we got to spend like a day and we were able to swim in the Red Sea. We got to have a final group meditation. We had some integration work done on the 5th of November. And then we flew back to Cairo where we were able to, we were in Sharm el-Sheikh, it looks like, I think on the 6th and 7th. And then we flew back to Cairo on the 8th of November when the retreat actually ended. And then I came back to the United States on November 9th. So this was a jam-packed experience. This was a beautiful experience. I absolutely loved this retreat. This retreat of Egypt in the fall of 2025 was the culmination of 3 different spiritual retreats that I've been on with Spherical Luminosity in the last 3 years. So in 2023, we went for 2 weeks to Peru and Bolivia in the fall, and we worked on what was referred to as seeding the light codes. So we were really working with seeding these different codes of the blue light and the gold light into our frequency resonance and working with those light codes. And then in 2024, we went to Scotland and we worked with the Christ consciousness and the Mary Magdalene frequency, specifically with a Christ consciousness grid that operates around the planet. And then in 2025, we worked in really activating our ancient wisdom of these light codes within our human physical form. So very exciting work. I can speak about it pretty much, you guys, at that level, which I've just talked to you about. I can't go much deeper than that other than to just share my excitement with you about how deep I felt this energy work was and how much it's already changing in my own personal life and how much I recommend for anyone who's interested in it, or for those of you who it resonates with, for you to consider doing some more research about it, because truly, truly everything on planet Earth is vibrating. This is a vibrational state that we're in, and the higher your vibration is, the more magical your life becomes. So like I said, the retreat ended on the 8th. I was back in the United States, reunited with the girls very soon after, November 9th, and have been working on my integration ever since. So I think when I record this next episode for you about sort of the good, the bad, and ugly, I'll do the next episode about some of the more difficult things. Belly is here just to say hello to me. Hi, Belle. I will share with you about some of the difficulties in terms of integration, because integration from this experience specifically is one of the most intense integrations from any spiritual work that I've ever done, that I've ever had. It's been pretty wild. And a lot of us, hi, honey, Bella's here to say hi. Hi, sweetie. Okay, are you getting ready for dinner? Okay, I am going to feed them dinner, but I will be back with another episode for you where I'll talk all about some of the more difficult parts of this experience, because even though there was delight in all of the days of this retreat, there were also some difficulties, and I'll share all of that with you in another episode. For now, I just want to thank you for watching and listening to the Energetically Efficient Show. Thank you for being a part of my community. Thank you for supporting this. If you really liked this episode, I would love for you to actually like it, share it with a friend, share it with someone who you think could benefit from this information. Otherwise, I will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.